Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talk to SATV, where we dive deep into the discussion of pressing global issues as well as national issues. Today, we are honored to have with us in our show Professor Shahab Inam Khan, a renowned academician, an expert of international relations at Jahangirnagar University.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Sir, we'll start our discussion with the most intriguing part of the international news, to be honest, within this 2 or 3 days. US President Donald Trump, he imposed tariff on China. Mm-hmm. And on retaliation, China imposed tariff on US products, namely coal, natural gas and all that. He imposed tariff on Mexico, he imposed tariff on Canada. And that has the consequences. And the consequences are very magical. So these imposing tariffs after resuming office, so how do you assess the situation?
Thank you, Shibli. I think the tariff war has officially begun. I mean, the point of discussion should be that why President Trump is imposing tariff. Is it by choice or is it by political consideration? What? I think President Trump's first and foremost agenda is to reconstruct and rebuild the U.S. economy. And according to the Republicans, there are three major issues in the U.S. economy. First, it has become increasingly dependent on external resources, particularly China, for its internal economic growth and development and consumption. So which he thinks that reduction on Chinese economy is very important to diversify its own manufacturing sector or service sector, or in that matter, science and technology and so on. The second important problem that he identified, that migration is a concern for U.S. economy, for which he wants to have a cap on migration issues, because he thinks that this is also affecting the U.S. social security as well as the services, which is putting pressure on the original Americans. I mean, well, when we mention original Americans are the Americans who are Red Indians, but certainly the entire country is composed of immigrants. But certainly here his point is those who are like son of the soil, in a sense, living in the US for many, many years. That's the second point. And the third point, I think, he thinks that America needs to focus more on domestic economic power building rather than becoming global police, which was basically one of the key features of the Democrat foreign policy. So all these three has really led him to come up with radical solutions. And that's why we have seen that he has imposed tariff to reduce the internal market or domestic market's dependency on the Chinese market. So I think that is very important to note. So therefore, his idea of tariff has really providing some sort of incentives, temporary though, to the American economy. So when he was really pushing a tariff issue with Mexicans, the Mexicans have agreed to guard or be vigilant over the border areas, which is, I think, important. And that's the reason the Americans have really stepped back. And of course, the Canadians, because his concerns over the illegal narcotics and so other issues that might be flowing through the Canadian border has to stop. So I think his idea of tariff is much more than only economy, but also to create reasonable pressure on the countries to straighten its own economy.
Thank you, sir. As you have said, that it worked magically for Canada, it worked magically for Mexico as well, because Mexico has put 10,000 border guards, Canada has taken initiatives so that drug trafficking should be controlled or stopped. So what about Bangladesh and India relationship? Because Bangladesh imports around 12 billion from India. It is more than 12 billion. Compared to the import, the export to India is nearly 2 billion. So there is a big trade imbalance. So if Bangladesh imposes tariff, learning from the Trump magical experience and magical, consequences. So if Bangladesh imposes tariffs on India, then does that, work for Bangladesh as well? Because we have border killings, we have a lot of problems in the border as well. So my question to you, sir, that whether Bangladesh is capable enough, because we are not that much, stronger nation, and India is a bigger neighbor with a lot of border we have with them. So can we learn something from US President in our, international relation?
I think I won't use the term magical, rather I would use the term calculated response. But here you have raised a very interesting question, which I'm quite sure the political economist or economist would be better poised to give you answer. But my understanding is that this is a question of economy of scale. I mean, I think the Indian economy is much more deeper than Bangladesh economy. If you look at Bangladesh-China relationship, we have a huge trade deficit too. So it's a question about that what kind of economy we can create to make our market much more viable or the products viable for the Indians or the Chinese to buy from us. So this is one major problem. The second major problem is when you have the trade imbalance. Trade imbalances are, as you have rightly mentioned, that we have a lot of non-tariff barriers. So non-tariff barriers are very much there. And particularly in the case of Bangladesh, India, we have seen the non-tariff barriers are quite artificially created. I mean, even unfortunately, we got to hear that from Assam and Tripura, Bangladesh's trade has become hished. The only reason is they think that Bangladesh's political situation is not right, and we have seen media reports about it. So it's not a natural market sometimes. That's why your question comes quite handy over here. So my understanding is eventually Bangladesh doesn't really have to think about the tariff war with India, for sure. But most certainly, Bangladesh can review its trade relationship with India because we now have much more diversified options for our trade. I mean, we are now seeing that relationship with Pakistan is growing. We are now seeing that we have much more greater relationship for basic commodities coming from many other sources. And most certainly, I would stress that we should improve our relationship once Myanmar becomes stable.
President Donald Trump froze all the foreign aids, to be honest. So as part of his Making America Great Again. So it has impact on Bangladesh as well, because there are a lot of NGOs that's been funded by USAID. So a lot of experts have said that we are now shifting from aid to trade.
Right.
Because, that's how America thinks that his future foreign policy would be. So how does that affect us? Are we capable enough to shift from aid to trade? Because as you have mentioned, our cattle market has improved. So we have capacities in some extent, but are we capable enough if a huge foreign aid's been stopped, because they are our major donor too?
The first issue is, over the past 50 years, Bangladesh's reliance on trade has largely reduced and heavily reduced. And even many of the large NGOs are not necessarily super dependent on the external donors. So that's one of the achievements, I must say, that Bangladesh has obtained over the period of time. Now, there are several sectors where I think aid is needed. I mean, in terms of, what I would call that, for an example, water sanitation and water purification and health. These are the areas where I think international community support will still be needed in Bangladesh, because our indigenous capacity to deal with it has eroded over time, largely due to our lack of interest in protecting our own resources. So what it means is that I think some international support is very much needed. But on the other hand, I think we should be able to generate our own resources. And I think 180 million people, market of 180 million people itself is a huge market. So therefore, I don't think that reduction of aid from the US should be a major concern for Bangladesh. The only concern for Bangladesh should be whether the international community will be reducing support for the Rohingya community that we have in our Cox's Bazar region, almost like 1.1 million population. So I think that's the only caveat that we need to be concerned about, immediate concern about, because USAID is the largest supporter, and USAID's contribution to the Rohingya camps have been quite astronomically high.
Sorry for interrupting, sir. We will get on with this discussion because that's a very important issue that you have raised, but it's time to go on a short break. Ladies and gentlemen, do turn in after a few minutes. We will come back. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back. We are in discussion regarding the Rohingya repatriation as well as funds of Rohingyas. Sir, you were discussing.
That's what I was trying to tell, that I think if the global humanitarian support for the Rohingyas continue to erode, that will be a major burden for Bangladesh, as well as that will have a implication for regional stability and security.
So what about the dignified Rohingya repatriation? How can international community could come forward, to be honest?
I think one of the major things that Bangladesh needs to do is basically see this Rohingya repatriation from Bangladesh's national interest point of view. I mean, historically, we have been calculating what the Americans or the Chinese or the Indians will think about if we push them back, or if what would be the issues, that will have geopolitical consequences. And I think we should come out of that. And this is the high time Bangladesh needs to think about its own national interest. So therefore, we need to focus on how to stabilize Rakhine. This should be number one point of reference for Bangladesh government to really focus on. The second important thing that they should look into is that how we can help the Rohingyas to return to their home. So we need to give them political voice, we need to give them strategic understanding of the equations, we need to give them all the supports that will enable them to have the courage to go back. So I think that is very important. And the third thing is we get to hear about integration of the Rohingyas into Bangladeshi society. The dangerous part of that is that this will only encourage our neighboring countries to put people to Bangladesh. And we got to see that neighborhood, there are efforts to expel Muslims, and then there will be more rebel groups who might become more interested in push other people to Bangladesh. And then we get to see that international community might be more focusing on Bangladesh to come and say that take them. So that kind of frustration actually persists within the Rohingyas. And I think the Rohingyas are not willing to take that any longer. So therefore, we need to have far more clarity in shifting decision-making from Dhaka's hand to the Rohingyas' hand about how they want to deal with Myanmar, Arakan Army, and Rakhine. So these are the three fundamental recommendations I think will be helpful in repatriation in the coming years.
Some say, sir, the problem of Rohingya is, of course, a humongous problem for us. Some predicts that Chinese involvement is necessary or indispensable to solve this Rohingya refugee crisis. Do you think the same?
I think the Chinese are a very critical actor, but as I mentioned, that we should think our national interests first. So, in our interest, Chinese certainly fits in, because Chinese, they also want to see Rakhine stabilized, because they have huge investment, they have strategic interest, they have their accessibility to the Bay of Bengal, bypassing the tensions over the Malacca Strait and obviously other regions. So I think we have one common interest, is to see that Rakhine remains stable. For the Chinese, it's economics. For us, it's to let the Rohingyas go back.
What about the Bangladesh and India relation? Because Bangladesh has historical ties with India, and India expects us to be grateful, and we were grateful to them. But how they're portraying in their media, their narratives are like we are Hindu hating and Hindu hating nations, as well as there is a possibility of using our land against their security, against their international security. We're a big threat, because if we don't obey them, then definitely there is a possibility that the land of Bangladesh could be used for the insurgencies of Northeast. So that's how the narratives are in Indian media. So how Bangladesh could actually, on this?
I think
are we giving proper reaction as well?
I think the first thing is, it's unfortunate, of course. I mean, Bangladesh doesn't gain anything by staging any kind of hostile relationship with India. I mean, Bangladesh, by its character, is a peaceful nation. This is the only country in Asia that has no conflict baggage. And it was the only country for India that remained as a stable friend for last 50 years. I mean, probably Indian foreign policy making community forgot that. So when the 5th of August happened, I mean, there was a tectonic shift, I mean, overnight, right? I mean, and that also shows that the foreign policy weakness of Delhi. And I would rather pinpoint and say that BJP's foreign policy failure. I mean, if you are a BJP tycoon justifying your foreign policy to your other political allies or political competitors, what are you going to say? I mean, Pakistan, Nepal has redrawn its map. You couldn't do anything. I mean, you have been a partner of genocidal military in Myanmar, which is now defeated, getting defeated regularly. Your Northeast India is being in a very deep shamble. Your relationship with Afghanistan was not the best in any ways. And now you have seen in Maldives, having the Chinese ships docked there, and Sri Lanka has a new government which is a left-leaning government. So altogether, I think the BJP's foreign policy has become much more challenged than ever. So my understanding is that India will recognize its foreign policy mistakes through political corrections in the coming months.
Recently, in a seminar, you have said that Bangladesh's foreign policy is forced to incorporate the will of the masses. So after 5th August, how Bangladesh shifted, adapted this policy?
I think the phenomenal thing of the 5th August is that foreign policy was always in the hands of few. I mean, it was a very elitist subject, largely concentrated within the political elite groups, more precisely with the Prime Minister's office. I mean, I won't say that Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which should be the cardinal body, was largely in the fix of foreign policy. So now what we have seen, that it has come to the hands of the mass, because the mass population is also equating the previous government as a tool of the Indian government. I mean, rather, when we mention Indian government, rather the BJP politics. So that kind of narratives have really forced to bring in change in Bangladesh's foreign policy behavior. Because, as I mentioned, that what do we gain by having hostile relationship with India? It's not us who created the hostility. So therefore, I think one of the critical realization, and I asked it to many of my Indian friends, that how much public perception matters in Indian foreign policy. Apparently, foreign policy is heavily dependent on public perception in India. Hence, they need to portray Bangladesh in a way that can be justified that there is a hostile government in Bangladesh. So we don't do that. So what happened is the people over the period of time, pending issues continued to be in the public memory. And public memory was also supported,
By facts.
By facts, what we get to see around. So I think this is a great lesson for everyone. I mean, not only for Bangladesh, but also for India, China, and many other countries. So I think what is very critical for everyone to understand that people are much more vigilant than ever. So they're actually technology, education, your interaction with the global community, everything comes as a package when you make a decision about a country. So I would say that the anti-India sentiment in Bangladesh has gained momentum not only because that we had pending issues with our neighboring country, but also the reactions that came from Delhi from the eve of the 5th of August. Had there been rational approach or rational response coming from India, probably we wouldn't have seen even the intensity of anti-India sentiment gaining momentum further. So what my understanding overall is that the government needs to be more careful and receptive of public perception when it comes to its relationship with whichever country it is. I mean, even if it is Pakistan, even if it is India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, United States, name anything. So therefore, I would strongly suggest that both India and Bangladesh needs to discuss this particular issue of public perception and the causes of public perception. I mean, you can't just make joke out of 170 million people and come and say that all of them are making a history of mass minority repression. I mean, if that is the case, even I said in one of the programs that it looks like we have to protect our own minority brothers and sisters from the neighboring country. I mean, apparently that kind of situation is there, because if you continue to say communal narratives, you're only inviting extremism. Exactly. And that's a careful way you are doing.
You're instigating the mass.
And you're instigating them. And look at Bangladesh's resilience against extremism. I mean, are we creating an environment? And I warned everyone in the month of September, October, in Daily Star and other newspapers that we need to be very, very careful about what we say. So I think you're right when I mentioned that the public perception matters. And we also have to be very serious about dealing with our bilateral relationship, which should be, I mean, not only India, I mean, which should be on the basis of national interest, strategic autonomy, and of course, the national aspiration to see ourselves as a dignified state, which we are. And 1971 is not a product of somebody's donation. 1971 is a hard-earned liberation of this country's people. I mean, everybody helped according to their own geopolitical interest. If geopolitical interest was less and humanitarian interest was more, probably Bangladesh's liberation process would have started much earlier. In between, we have lost so many lives. I mean, we debate whether it is 300,000 people or 3 million people, but at the end of the day, even a single people died means we have lost a life. So therefore, I think this hard-earned liberation is not anybody's donation, not anybody's whim. This was hard earned by us, and we need to write our history properly.
It's time to go on a break. So, ladies and gentlemen, do come back after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, do welcome back to the show. Before the break, we were discussing about India-Bangladesh relation. We ought to be grateful, that's what India demands, that because they have given us shelter. But we are we have given the shelter to the Rohingya community. But in return, we didn't want anything from them. And we would not want anything from them. That's how we are. So India has a policy of neighborhood first. But despite having that policy, you have narrated what happened amongst the other countries of the South Asia. So that's where you have left. If we start from there, sir.
No, I think we have brought a very interesting issue that the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Have we pushed any Rohingyas out of the country, despite there are numerous allegations against them? Is there any kind of initiatives by the people to throw them out? No, because the whole spirit of 1971 steel dwindles, steel available around us, right? The memory is that we have to be human first. Before a lot of lives are lost, we have given them shelter. And we do not know when they will go back. So I think that's the difference between us and many other countries in the neighborhood. So I think that has to be remembered by everyone. And we don't make the Rohingyas a tool of geopolitics or domestic politics at all. No, we don't do that. I mean, if you speak to any political parties in Bangladesh, they won't say that we have made them a tool for anything, for our own personal gain or perhaps the geopolitical games or anything. So I think that we need to be very clear about. So this is one. The second important factor is, I believe, is that Bangladesh's foreign policy cornerstone has always been the multilateralism, regardless of the regimes. Whether the regimes were able to tap into multilateral diplomacy and so on, that may be a separate debate, but multilateralism remained the cornerstone. And that allows us to see things from a very common interest and welfare interest and commonwealth interest. So which we see is very much missing in the neighborhood. So as a result, you get to see that SAARC, which was our brainchild, is dormant. BIMSTEC is headquartered in Dhaka, remains largely hostage to certain countries, right? So I think the whole spirit of multilateralism in South Asia is largely missing because of geopolitical or perhaps myopic political interest. And I don't think Bangladesh shows that, as evident from our approach to climate change, world health, and everything. We need to really fix few things in our foreign policy and our bilateral relations with any country. Is the first that we need to really chart out exactly what we want in our foreign policy. I mean, if we talk about collective security, I mean, whether other countries are willing to be a part of collective security, or it's just that power block system that you want to create and say, okay, hey, look, China, we have done this, or hey, look, US, we have done this, right? We don't get into that. And the second thing is we need to talk about economic power building. And the problem with the Indian subcontinent, or perhaps the greater South Asia, is that you cannot have the economic block building because of the politics that we get to see in the neighborhood. So our only option is to really be very serious about Southeast Asia and Far East and others. In that case, when you mention neighborhood first, I mean, the question is which neighborhood in many cases, right? I mean, we love to go to the US, we love to go to far away to do trade and everything, but we don't do within ourselves. If you look at ASEAN intra-regional trade is high, Europe is totally a classic example. And South Asia, despite being so big and having India as the large economy, the intra-regional trade is really meager. So which means the markets are artificial, not natural, because natural markets are being protected or being siphoned out through the myopic political interests by saying, okay, we are having Bangladesh under control, Pakistan is this, Afghanistan is that, Nepal is this, and those sort of narratives. So I think all these countries are now coming out of all the myopic political views, and I guess they will be doing better in the coming years. Political consensus is needed. I mean, one political party is heavily dependent on country X, the other political party becomes dependent on country Y, and we have seen it over the past 15 years. And that's the weakness we have, and all the political parties should have. And at least I admire one thing about the Indian foreign policy community is that they are always sticking to their own national interests, what may come. I mean, while August 5th, 2024 challenged that, but still, at least Congress, BJP and others have the similar views on Bangladesh, ganging up and saying, okay, Bangladesh has to be portrayed as a pariah country. So I think we need to have the national consensus on our bilateral, multilateral, trilateral, or any kind of relationship. And the last thing that we should have our foreign policy narrative, which is largely should be linked with your national interests. So that is also missing. I mean, everybody has their own views about everything. At the end of the day, then we get lost in translation of politics. So what I would suggest that we should, Bangladesh foreign policy should have a very constructive narratives, which is the reflection of the public, domestic market, promises, aspirations, and the spirit of our liberty and freedom.
I was reading an article while I was coming over here, written by Mahfuz Anam. There he said that India considers only Pakistan and China as their neighbors, and others, they only happy about it when they obey by them, when they don't have dispute with them. So is the water issue that big? Because you mentioned about the impression of the masses that they have the memory. So despite solving the water issue, can we go forward as well and meander through these difficult times that we are having in India? Definitely we are having a very difficult time with them.
I think one critical issue is that, I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit of mean over here by saying whether China really is bothered about India, frankly speaking. I doubt.
Not at all.
Because if you look at the Chinese media, Chinese scholars, how many times are they really bothered about their global power? I mean, one of the two superpowers. They're bothered about Europe, they're bothered about United States, and they're going to Mozambique, they're going to South Africa, they're going to Peru, they're going for Antarctica expedition, Arctic expedition, they're sending satellites and cyber and so on. I think the Chinese would always think it in a very different way. Plus $130 billion trade, probably something like that. And the trade deficit is heavily in favor of the Chinese, right? And in the case of Pakistan, it's the same thing. I mean, Pakistan, Kashmir issue and nuclearization, and now having the greater relationship with China. But Pakistan has its own problems, internal problems. So I don't think that Pakistanis, they do keep the Indian narrative very much alive within the statecraft, but I don't think that they're much bothered about what's happening in India in a way that rules their life. I mean, if you look at the Indian media for the last 5-6 months, it's all about bullying about who is doing what. I mean, even if you look at Bangladesh, I mean, except for some people who the whole idea discourse about power projection is fading. So I think that's something that I would imagine from what you have mentioned about Mr. Mahfouz Anam's article, if that is the article. And the second thing is, I don't think Bangladesh or any other country has that appetite any longer. And we have seen in the case of Trump administration, the much anticipated relationship that we were thinking about is not there between Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi. But that doesn't mean that Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump's relationship will not improve or become much more greater than ever. But certainly, so far, that was also an indicator to Bangladesh to really see, okay, something is wrong.
As you have mentioned earlier, that about the SAARC and how SAARC could be effective. I think the biggest impediment of SAARC is the distance of India and Pakistan, because their problems comes first when we want SAARC to be effective.
Right.
Even one of the foreign ministers of Pakistan, Hina Rabbani Khar, she said even African Union is more effective than the SAARC. The African Union is even much integrated than these countries of South Asia. So how do we, what are the approaches that we should take to make SAARC effective?
I mean, you're right. When it comes to SAARC, it is more about India and Pakistan. Well, it didn't help Pakistan, did it? So
it didn't help India as well.
That's what I was coming.
Yeah.
So India, no. I mean, so what the net result is, they both are victim of non-cooperation. I mean, the cost of benefit of cooperation is way, way higher than the cost of non-cooperation, right? So I think we need to think about it. And on the other hand, I don't think that Bangladesh really have to, really have to focus on one or two countries. I mean, it can always convene a greater relationship, sort of regionalism building with many other countries. I mean, you can always bring in the countries like Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and so on. You can stretch it up to all the way to the Central Asia. You can stretch it up to China, or you can stretch it up to Thailand. So that's not a problem. But the point is whether Bangladesh is going to do that. And that's the political decision that Bangladesh has to take. I mean, Bangladesh's multilateralism cannot be hostage to one or two countries' agenda. And second, there should be some sort of consensus on reforming the SAARC. And I think that is needed. I mean, you cannot have bilateral talks in SAARC is not a great idea.
Obviously not.
So I think we need to come out of that, and maybe some sort of dialogues among the countries, because Bangladesh is well poised to take a lead on that. For one reason is that it was the initiator of SAARC. So therefore, Bangladesh can always convene a meeting with Pakistan and India to talk about how can we reform SAARC. Now that will be a litmus test to see who is more interested to come and really seize region from an integrated point of view rather than solely, one-on-one point of view. So that would be a classic case, and I would be very happy to see that what is the result of that sort of meeting.
Bangladesh has to keep good relation with China, because China is a very important strategic partner in the development. Bangladesh has to keep good relation with India. Bangladesh has to have good relation with Russia as well, because they are our development partners as well.
Right.
So in this era, is it possible to maintain this multilateralism by not joining any bloc? What do you think?
I mean, if you look at the current state of politics, at some point of time, Bangladesh will have to tilt to power blocks. I mean, that is inevitable because the nature of economic warfare, cyber, and everything you take is shifting. And one of the issue that we must not forget, yes, I do appreciate President Trump's national interest, but that also has an implication in the global political divisions. If you look at NATO, I mean, example, NATO themselves now really worried. I mean, without the United States, the very existence of NATO can always be challenged. And Donald Trump's reaction on Greenland has put Denmark and others into some sort of confusion too. And we are now seeing that Ukraine, Russia, and the Russians will have much more comfort than ever in international relations too. So I think we are going to see a lot of organic changes, and for which the international politics may become heavily divided. And in that case, the pressure will be on us too, to go for some sort of alliance politics, even if not alliance politics, like tilted towards certain alliance is possible. And always we have to also remember, if Bangladesh's economy stabilize or Bangladesh's political and security environment remains stable, right, Bangladesh is going to be a major player in the global politics. Now, what my fear has always been that whether we understand the necessity of stability, whether our political parties or the actors in political system really understands to have stability as of paramount importance to remain a very critical conduit in international politics. Because if the law enforcement fails, if we are not able to return to a stable democracy, and if we get to hear that extremism returns, our whole momentum may get lost. So in that case, the onus largely lies on Bangladeshis or Bangladeshi state of Bangladesh, then the external countries, and we should be very careful about it.
Thank you, Mr. Shah Abinam Khan.
Thank
It's
you.
an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to stay with us. Mr. Khan's shed light on the international policies that we should, take to go forward, and he shed light how Bangladesh could play its role in establishing international peace, security, and brotherhood. And he reiterated the fact, the importance of being united so that our international policy should evolve towards achieving international peace, security, and brotherhood. Thank you very much for staying with us. See you on the next week. Till then, goodbye. Allah Hafiz.